That night was supposed to be about my mother. Candles, the smell of garlic and rosemary, the kind of table setup she liked polished silverware, linen napkins, crystal glasses that caught the candlelight and sent little shivers across the polished wood. My mother, Diane, had insisted on every last detail. It's her birthday, she'd said, over and over. She deserves something pretty. Pretty, in our family, was code for putting on the face we wanted the neighborhood to see. I parked on the street, smoothed down my blouse, and rehearsed a smile in the side mirror. My chest was tight in that way that makes your breath feel like it's tucked up under your ribs. I told myself it would be a normal night cake, small talk, everyone going home pretending everything was fine. I told myself this because the alternative, expecting the old patterns to repeat, was almost unbearable. Those patterns had a shape I knew by memory: Dad's impatience, Chloe's practiced sweetness, Mom's anxious peacemaking. I did not, and could not, stop them from being who they were. Or so I'd been telling myself for years. We sat down. Chloe was already there, flawless as always, the right dress, the right laugh, the right energy that made people lean in to listen. Dad, Thomas, lifted his glass and made the little speech about what a wonderful mother my mom is, about family and sacrifice. Everyone clapped. I clapped. My hands remembered the rhythm of going along, of not making waves. That rhythm had kept me safe for so long. There was comfort in the quiet compliance. Then Chloe shifted, blue eyes catching the light in the way she knew how to make them, and said, casually, I really need a car. Classes are all over town and the internship schedule is a mess. The bus is unreliable. She said it like it was a logistics problem to be solved, nothing emotional, nothing that required thinking about how often someone else had carried her. It was a subtle performance. She'd been practicing the practical request for a while. I could see the choreography in the tilt of her head. Dad's expression softened the way it always did when Chloe mentioned something she wanted. He said, slow and sure, she's right. A young woman shouldn't be stuck on public transit. I'll help with that. Then his eyes slid toward me, and something like expectations settled in the room. As if an invisible question had been posted on the air, will Mia step up? Maybe Mia can help with that, too, he threw in, not even careful enough to mask the jab. She's not using her car as much, is she? Mia works from home a lot. The sentence landed with the weight of the familiar, the assumption that I, the one who had always given, would keep giving. Time has this funny way of expanding the seconds when you know something terrible is coming. In my head, I could almost hear the old years assembling every little remark, every birthday speech, every joke at my expense. I felt the ghost of high school, the kid who ran track and couldn't finish the mile, the kid who cried in the locker room because people made it mean more than it was. The memory hurt. It was raw and stupid and private, and now it was being yanked into the light and used like evidence. Don't be selfish, Mia, Dad added casually, like he was reading from the family rules. You know how it is. Selfish. The word has a sound like glass breaking in my head now. It always had that power for them. Their shorthand for blame: not tall enough, not disciplined enough, not whatever enough looked like that week. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The fork I was holding grew heavy, like an anchor. Mom, desperate to smooth, reached across to Dad's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. He's just worried about Chloe's safety, she said, with that slightly airy voice she used when she needed everyone to stop. Your father only wants what's best. Chloe's smile widened, as if Mom's sentence confirmed a prize had been won. She said, almost sweetly, I don't expect a handout. I just need help getting to class. Can we figure out a way? Her tone was neutral enough that the room could believe it was a normal request, not a transfer of emotional property. We'd rehearsed our family dynamics so many times that the choreography was nearly perfect. But this time, something in me that had been quietly building for years made a sound like the first crack in ice. I set the fork down carefully. The clink against the plate sounded loud as an alarm. If Chloe needs a car, I said. Slow? Measured? Why doesn't Dad buy her one? I kept my voice small because my body was busy doing the thing my mouth didn't trust it to do, make the argument aloud. He's bought her things before. He bought her the laptop without a second thought. The study trip. Why ask me to hand over something I worked for? There was a beat of real confusion on Chloe's face, a flicker of annoyance. Then that trained sweetness slid back on. Because you already have one. Mia, why make Dad buy more when we could just consolidate? Isn't that practical? Practical. Consolidate. Code words for given. I could feel the whole room watching. My mother's hand hovered in midair, like she couldn't decide whether to push me into a hug or pull me back into silence. Dad's jaw tightened. You're making a scene, he said. The sentence, a small thing that dropped into my gut like a stone. Why does everything have to become a problem when it could just be solved? You're always making things about yourself. There it was again, declare the person who refuses to submit as selfish, and you have permission to ignore the actual question at hand. I could see the pattern in their faces, the way they favored Chloe, because she mirrored what they wanted to control. Presentation, promising returns. Chloe's body fit what our family elevated. She wore that like a uniform. I had a body that didn't conform to their narrative. My body had been the place where their frustrations landed for years. Maybe it's petty to catalog the ways my body became a rhetorical device in my family. But that's the truth of it. Dad would joke about me needing to eat less. Diane would worry about my health in public and be syrupy sweet in private. Cousins would snicker and call it tough love. Each remark stacked into a wall that convinced me, for a while, that my body was the reason for everything: bad moods, failed relationships, the habit of not allowing myself to take up space. The jokes were always framed as concern, which allowed them to be cruel without taking responsibility. I could have turned the old familiar move, put my head down, laughed it off, promised to be better, and let the night carry on. Instead, there was a quiet, dangerous part of me answering back that evening. I had memories tucked into the edges of my mind, times I'd sacrificed for family, delayed rent to pay for Chloe's classes, covered a phone bill so Chloe could go on a weekend trip. I thought of my savings used to patch holes in the life of someone who'd later call me selfish. I thought of the little humiliations that had become the background music of my life. And I thought, enough. You know what I said? Louder than I intended. My voice cut through the ambient noise, glasses chiming, plates shifting, a distant dog barking on the street. If Chloe is so pressed for a car, then let her start paying her share. I'm not going to be the family ATM. I've been covering things for years. I'm done being everyone's backup plan. The room faltered. Forks froze midair. The cashier's laugh from the supermarket and some unrelated memory streaked up my spine and mingled with the present. Diane's face flushed. Chloe's smile thinned into something sharp. My father's hand curled into a fist. You can't be serious, Dad said. You'll make her homeless. Then don't be, I shot back, even as a shade of myself wanted to soften the edges of my words. If she's so capable, she can figure it out. You've done this for your image for years. Let her stand on her own. There was no swagger in it, only exhaustion and a clarity that felt almost violent because of how clean it was. I wasn't performing for anyone. I was stipulating a boundary. My mother, who'd been looking between us like a referee unsure which penalty flag to throw, finally spoke in a voice that was all too familiar, soft and pleading, but with an undercurrent of something else. Mia, she said, don't say this in front of everyone. Please, it's my birthday. Her hand shook a little when she reached toward mine. There was a pleading in her face that made me think of all the nights I'd sat awake hearing Dad's muttered complaints about money, about how we always had to prop Chloe up in social situations. That same pleading had stopped her from ever having a spine. It explained nothing. It just made me angrier, because for years that pleading had been the form her complicity took. Diane Chloe turned her face to the rest of the table as if the speech she gave next would exonerate her. This is ridiculous, she said, with that same brittle sweetness. I can't believe you would play this card. Mia, you know how much work I put into things. I don't ask for handouts. Her eyes flicked to Dad, and I saw the conditioning click into place. He stood up then, loud enough to make people look, the volume of his voice filling the room like a foghorn. This is absurd, he barked. Mia, you've always been selfish. You never think of the family, you're self-centered and ungrateful. And there it was, his verdict. Simple and declarative. The family had a script for everything. And this moment fit neatly into the oldest line, the one where I was the problem. I was the one who lacked discipline. I was the one who didn't have the right priorities. My past kindnesses were invisible. My parenting instincts were treated like flaws. My autonomy was rebranded as selfishness. My face burned with a fury that was both ancient and immediate. I pushed my chair back so hard it scraped the floor. I have been the family's bank, their babysitter, their emergency fund. I said, I have lent my paycheck to prop up a fantasy you all believe about Chloe. I keep receipts of the times I've covered rent, groceries, tuition for someone who calls me selfish. I'm done being taken for granted. There was a long, disorienting pause. The world outside the window went on indifferent, the squeal of brakes, a dog barking, a car idling at the curb. Inside, the air had all the sharpness of a winter night. My mother's eyes welled, but there was a strange glint of something steadier than fear, like the slow hardening of someone who had finally seen. You can't burn your bridges, Mia, Dad warned, and you could hear in his voice both the threat and the attempt to moralize it. Families stick together. You're making this about yourself. Families that burn you out don't deserve your loyalty, I replied. There's a difference between family and being a resource for someone else's image. No one had a ready answer for that, for the first time I could remember. The tone in the room shifted from the usual trivialities into something dangerous exposure. For all their power, for all their rituals and careful curation of appearances, they had never been asked to truly account for themselves. I had been the quiet ledger that never balanced. When I closed my book and said, "I'm done," the sound of a slammed cover echoed in the house. The fallout was immediate and complicated. There were people who took sides quietly, an aunt who texted me later to say she always thought my sister was polished but brittle, a cousin who hinted that maybe I had a point. There were others who called me cruel, said I had humiliated my family on my mother's birthday. My father avoided my eyes. Chloe composed messages of wounded entitlement that dripped with righteous fury. My mother apologized in fragmented, guilty sentences and then retreated into a shell of attempting normalcy. Days stretched into weeks. There was cooling off, like a house left to settle after an argument. My life continued: work, friends, the grind, but there was a splinter in every family conversation, a fracture you could run your finger along and feel. Whenever I thought I'd be crushed under the weight of it, something in me would rise like a tide pushing back. I didn't storm out immediately the next morning. Instead, I began small, methodical changes that steady hands make when someone decides to take their life back. I opened a new bank account in my own name. I stopped covering Chloe's expenses, no more PayPal transfers hidden in vague subject lines. I set a boundary on calls and shows, letting messages sit unanswered until I felt like engaging rather than performing. There were consequences. Chloe called, shrill and urgent. "You can't do this to me," she said. "You'll ruin me. How could you be like this?" Her voice had the practiced edge of someone who expected people to rush. It was not anger that hurt me then, but a deep, slow pity. I recognized the machinery, how entitlement is cradled by compliments and material cushions. I also recognized the cost a person never tested, who had learned to measure worth by the size of the applause. Dad called, his voice attempting calm. "You'll regret becoming estranged," he warned. "People don't forgive easily." There was the pressure of family duty bleating like a loudspeaker. But I had learned something in those months: doing what everyone expects is not the same as doing what's right for you. 6 months later, I had moved into a small apartment that smelled of lemon cleaner and new curtains. It was mine, filled with furniture I'd paid for and assembled by myself. I bought a couch with cushions I liked, not the kind my mother would approve. I planted herbs on the windowsill. I booked a class that had nothing to do with being presentable and everything to do with joy ceramics. My hands, dusty with clay, felt like tools that could shape more than just pots. At work, something shifted too. Without the emotional tax of constantly smoothing family friction, my energy was available for other things. I took on a project that consumed me, that rewarded me in ways I hadn't imagined: emails filled with praise for my ideas, a small promotion that felt like a quiet nod to competence rather than a public spectacle. I started therapy and slowly unspooled the years of adaptive behavior that had kept me small. My mother began visiting more often. At first, it was tentative coffee and conversation that hovered around safe topics. But gradually, she started naming things. "I'm sorry I let him make you the butt of his jokes," she confessed one late afternoon, her hands wrapped around a mug, the lines at her eyes heavier but softer. I thought staying quiet was protecting everyone. I was wrong. Her apology came heavy with the weight of someone who had been taught to keep the house polished at the cost of her own courage. There was relief in that admission. It didn't fix everything, but it was a bridge. My relationship with her changed shape. It morphosed into something that had friction, but also clearer boundaries. Chloe reached out only sporadically. Her messages were short, sometimes defensive, sometimes asking for favors in a tone that assumed entitlement. When I turned down the invitations to bail her out, when I simply didn't respond to the thinly veiled demands, there was a strange, quiet unraveling. She began to rely on the city's shuttle systems, took a part time job, and eventually, months later, sent a short message that she'd bought a car. No thank you, no reconciliation. It was a practical update, like a headline. Dad didn't change much. He would show up at family events with a chipper facade, like a man who'd stitched his humility into a costume. He laughed at the right moments, made small talk, but the barbs still flashed now and then in a way that suggested habit more than cruelty. Sometimes I wondered if he'd ever truly see how his words landed. Sometimes I wished he would. What changed in me was not vengeance but perspective. I realized revenge isn't always a dramatic expose or a calculated humbling. It can be the quiet, steady reclaiming of one's own life. It is taking up space you were taught to shrink from. It is buying your own plane ticket and sitting in the window seat, feeling the wash of the engine under you and the knowledge that the world is not something you have to wait permission for. When I think about that dinner now, I don't only see the humiliation or the shock of the moment, I see the way the room went quiet when I finally said no, the way attention shifted like a tide. I remember the small acts that amassed into the larger life change, opening a bank account in my name, sending a therapy request, buying a couch that matched my taste. Those were quiet revolutions. So, yeah, I said the words. I created a rupture. It was messy and painful and not particularly noble, but it worked. I chose to value myself in a room that had never valued me, and it turned out that was more than enough. If you're wondering what the moral of this is, I'll tell you plainly, boundaries save people. They are not cruelty, they are clarity. And when the people who raised you weaponize love into a tool for control, the only sane response is to collect the pieces of yourself and build something that doesn't depend on someone else's approval. That's not revenge, that's living. I'm not rich, I'm not famous. I still have moments where I hear my father's voice in my head, where the old shame tries to creep back. But I also have a small apartment that smells like lemon and clay, a job I care about, and a mother who's learning to speak up. I have a life that I bought with my own work and my own refusal to be erased. And when I drive my car past the block where my parents live, I don't feel like I'm fleeing. I feel like I'm driving somewhere that belongs to me.